Welcome, everyone, to Touching Base. I'm your host, Eric Arnold. Today, I'm joined by my friends, Andrew Naw, Andy Enck, and Joe Olson. Gentlemen, how are we guys doing tonight?
Eric,
awesome, thanks.
All right, tonight we are actually, we want to talk about the Caps. They are 1-1 in the playoffs, and we also want to talk about this NIL, the names, images, and likeness laws that are kind of taking place. But before we do any of that, I want to ask you guys the ever important question: what are you drinking tonight?
I got the Devil's Backbone 16-pointer for tonight.
Nice. I got a Michigan brew, so I went back home last weekend. Shorts brew, soft parade, little fruity, high-end beer.
Yeah, you've been doing those lately.
I'm still buzzsawing through my Landshark, though I did take inventory. There's only 7 left after tonight.
That was my next follow-up.
Yeah, gonna be able to wrap that up soon. Except I will need to clean out my beer fridge. There's some stuff in there that I've seen 3 presidents, so I definitely need to clean that out.
Yeah, but you got some work to do then. You're saving.
It might not be safe. It might not be potable anymore.
Yeah. Well, you got to find out. There is a way to figure that out. You know?
In the name of science.
It's a quick science lesson. I'm sure it'll go well. And I am actually returning because I enjoyed it so much. I have got a local brew from our area, a little Mully's. Their Knuckle Puck. It was so good last time. I decided to get some more. And that's what I'm going to be enjoying this evening. And I have a feeling they will not see 3 presidents. I'm not even sure if they've got the next 3 hours in them, if I'm being quite honest with you. But we're going to find out, and I wish them nothing but the best. Speaking of which, by the way, I have noticed the weather has been starting to pick up around here. And I'm starting to get those vibes. My vaccine has kicked in. Places are starting to open up. Just before we get into sports, how excited are you guys to actually be able to get out to a place like a Mully's and enjoy some music and get a beverage?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually heading up to the big New York City this weekend for a quick visit with a dear friend of mine. Going to have some dinner and some drinks, but yeah, definitely going to set the soul free on for the first time in a while.
Good for you. Are you seeing Chris? Who are you seeing?
Yeah. Chris and Kevin are they're in town, and a couple of other friends from that life. So yeah, going to be like a fancy schmancy dinner in the city. I think I'll be the most underdressed person there, but that's how I roll.
Yeah, that's what you do. You represent.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we just yesterday got to stop wearing our masks at work too. And so like it feels like we're just free. And especially when we're watching hockey playoffs at night too, seeing those stadiums start to fill up and everything, it actually starts to feel like it was a year and a half ago. So and nice weather and everything is feeling great.
I mean, I'm all about this Tuesday night having a beer with the guys virtually, but I can't wait until we're in the same room doing possibly the same thing or others.
Yeah, I absolutely, dude, that I cannot wait for that. And I know we're planning on trying to do that at some point in the future, I'm hoping. All right, so let's pretend we're there. This is the closest thing with best we got. We have got the Caps. First of all, they lost in a heartbreaker to the Bruins. Both their games, I think this is a total of something like 100 games in a row that they've played that have been decided by 1 goal or less. This one, of course, in the playoffs is like any other. They lose. I believe it was 4-3 in overtime. Early in the overtime period. I guess Andrew, I'll start with you. What happened?
Yeah, I think that's like 11 or 12 playoff games with the Bruins that have ended in overtime, something like that, because the Caps know that my blood pressure is already bad. It's been an evenly matched series, which is about what I would have expected. Both teams playing really smart, don't make a ton of mistakes. A couple of bounces here, a couple of deflections there. The Caps fortunately haven't looked at a place or anything like that. They're not, like I said, they're not making any really bad decisions.
Are you surprised by that? Because they've had, a lot of injuries. They've got a 400-year-old goaltender in there.
A little bit. I think they're humming a little bit better than I thought they would, just because they were kind of a helter-skelter finish to the year with, like as you said, so many guys nicked up and missing time. And Ovi came back like gangbusters. Game 1 looked phenomenal. Like
he really did.
Ovechkin from 5-6 years ago. And then last night he was not missing, but didn't quite have that much of an impact. I don't know if
it looked like the Bruins adjusted their defense to specifically take him out of the game.
Yeah, and you know what they do? And I was looking that they do really, schematically, they really clog up the center, right? they take away those high danger chances, take away that high danger ice. That really like where, Capitals who like to move laterally so much and move the puck back and forth through that, like, from dot to dot in the offensive zone. They're really not getting that. The Bruins are really cutting that down. And they're another really balanced team, right? They can play a lot of the same way the Caps do. They got some guys that play heavy, especially on the back end. That are gonna give some guys like Ovechkin, like Mantha, like Wilson a hard time. And then they got great skills with like Bergeron, Pasta, Marchand even. As much as I despise him, they got some guys that do things a lot of things really well. So two very well balanced and equally matched teams. And I'm just a little worried about if it comes down to goaltending. Vanacek going down early was kind of a concern. Tuukka certainly got the much better pedigree than literally any goaltender in the Capitals organization at the moment.
Right.
I'll tell you who I was thinking about today, who I wouldn't hate having right now, is Henrik Lundqvist. Hasn't been so stout the last couple of years, but
and he's been getting healthy too.
A ton of playoffs.
I'll tell you what, you think about just the two evenly matched teams, all the different players that have been in and out of the Bruins and the Caps organization over the last 5-6 years. I found myself in the first two games kind of watching, and the players that I'm paying attention to were the same players that I was paying attention to 4 or 5 years ago. For the Caps, it's Ovi, it's Backstrom, it's John Carlson, right? I mean, it's all these guys. For the Bruins, it's Krejci, it's Bergeron, it's Marchand, and
Zdeno Chara.
It's Sans Zdeno Chara in red. But I find it's like, wow, the game still centers around those core players even after all these years.
Yeah, you made up struck another chord with me about Backstrom. He's had a very kind of quiet 2 games so far, and he's the quiet guy that is. This is the most underrated, guy in the NHL, which is at that point you're no longer underrated, but whatever.
Is that because he's playing in the center? I mean, like, first of all, I know their center position's already jacked up right now as it is.
And I think that's a lot of what it is. I think he's getting some tougher matchups just because they're out Kuznetsov, and then Lars Eller, their 3 center, got banged up. It seemed like last night. TJ Oshie's
been playing
center for a few games, and Oshie's just like, he's a guy, right? He could do just about anything. And I'll tell you. Conversely, like a guy like Michael Raffl that they got at the deadline from Philadelphia for a bag of pucks, right? Like he's played not a ton of minutes, but he's noticeable when he's on the ice, right? He's a guy that plays all 3 forward positions, and you can just plug him in there like this, like perfect kind of like deadline. Like we want to make a playoff push. We need a guy with experience, veteran presence, experience that has that versatility. He's been pretty stand out the first couple of games.
How concerned are you guys about the face-off situation? I think they lost like 76% of the face-offs or something ridiculous. And that's I know I'm typically sarcastic with my numbers, but I think that's actually pretty close to accurate.
Yeah, they've been getting smoked in the dot. They've been getting smoked in the dot, and that's hurt them in the past. And like I think it was game 1 more so that Boston scored off the face-off a couple of times. Caps have scored off the face-off a couple of times. It's definitely something to watch. But I think the goaltending is probably your headline story, followed by guys coming in and going out, and who can sustain some injuries here and there.
Is Samsonov coming back?
That's a fantastic question. So like Kuzi and Samsonov, like there's some questionable COVID stuff. And both were on the COVID protocol list back earlier in the year. I think one or both of them reported having had pretty severe symptoms at the time, and taking them a little bit to get back to being able to play. Samsonov even took a couple of starts down in Hershey just to get some conditioning back up. And then there's an issue where one of them may have tested positive again, and then whoever, like the other one was a close contact.
There's no room to you don't have time to get your skates under you. And it's already such a thin margin. I mean, right. But at the same time, you got to have your best players out there, it seems like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like Kuznetsov is not, 2019 Kuznetsov right now, and he hasn't been this year. He has been the last couple of years, but he's still a difference maker, and he's still better than, TJ Oshie playing your 3rd center and having Eller kick up to your 2nd center. Like they can do those kinds of things in the short term. They proved that again in 2019. I think it was against Columbus. They had to kind of finagle stuff when I think Oshie missed a couple of games. They can move guys around, and they can, withstand that. Oh, it was Backstrom missed like the end of the Pittsburgh series or something. They can withstand that for a few games, but not like they're not going to win anything that way.
Can you explain to me the embellishment call?
Not really. The referees were calling it real tight last night, and they called a lot of
tight.
they're
I
calling
don't
a
know
lot
if tight's the word.
they're calling a lot of offsetting penalties, which is not typical. Joke and like check my math on that. That's not super typical. But there's been some rough stuff in a couple of the other series so far, and I think they've gotten from the top to like, not let anything go, because last night there was just absolutely no room for anything. But it's just like, it's goofy. Like that one was bad, but worse was a little while later. Anthony Mantha and Marchand got into it, after the end of a play, whatever, like typical Brad Marchand stuff. And, the guy giving it back to him, he wasn't innocent. A couple face washes here and there, but like the linesman or whatever's in front of him, and Marchand just comes up and like, just taps him in the back of the head with the stick. It's just Brad Marchand shit. It's not
just letting him know you're there.
Yeah, it's just Brad Marchand, right? And the ref, like, he gave him both the what for, and it's like, man, they didn't do nothing to him. And it's just like, yeah, he gave him a face wash, but it's like, let's not penalize the face wash at this point in time. We don't have a hockey at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, what were some of the things you noticed in the game?
Well, I kind of have two thoughts about the series overall. And the first one is, not only, so obviously the first two games have gone to overtime, resulting in 1-goal games and everything like that. They haven't gotten very deep into overtime, which I think is good. I think that would have a lasting effect if that keeps going on later into the series. So that's been happening. The Penguins' first game went to overtime. My Minnesota Wild first game went to overtime. That's just a lot of close teams playing that know a lot about each other throughout the year. So I think that's something to watch if there's continuous tight games that go to overtime. The second thing I was thinking is, to y'all's point, Backstrom and Ovi in particular, if the Caps are going to win this series, assuming it's going to be close the whole way, those two are going to have to make an impact, right? And so They are going to be a difference maker if the Caps are going to win this series. And so they cannot be quiet in games 3 and 4 if the Caps are going to go on to win this series.
I think it was you last week who said that you felt that whichever team has more toughness, whoever can, handle the adversity and get through that will be the team that you think will advance in here. And that includes players like Ovechkin and Backstrom, getting through, figuring this out, the Bruins defense and coming through and advancing.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, to Andrew's point about the Bruins clogging up the middle and taking away Ovi's favorite spot over there, I mean, they're going to have to find a way to get Ovi working, and whether it's that spot, I know he had a nice assist on a Oshie goal in there, but I mean, they're going to have to find a way to get those two work. Backstrom and Ovechkin working together, I think, on top of, Chara, no matter if you think he's like, 97 years old now or something like that, but he knows a lot about all these guys that are the core players from the Bruins. So I think that'll be, as the deeper that this series goes, I think that him being able to make an impact against those players for the Caps will be a big impact later as well.
Do you think the Capitals' size will play a factor into this? And as if the games, are going into overtime and they possibly go 7 games, do you think they'll be able to wear them down? I mean, we've talked about that in, I think, 2 podcasts ago, being able to physically wear down some of these teams just because of their size.
I think that it definitely is something to watch. Obviously the Charas and, the Tom Wilsons and, the big guys that are out there are going to have to play physical and make their impact. But, Boston's shown in the first 2 games that, they can match up with them physically. And I just think that it's just going to be very, very close the whole way. And I think that whatever I talked about earlier, the core players that I still recognize from 4 or 5 years ago on both teams, whichever one of those teams' core players is breaking through and making an impact games 3, 4, and 5, that's the team that's probably going to come away with it at the end.
I think at that point, it really could be either team, because guys like Krejci, guys like Bergeron, like they're similar to Nick Backstrom, and like they're not always flashy. They just kind of go about their business and get it done. And those guys can just kind of turn it on and take over a game. And we haven't even really heard from like Pasta, right? Like David Pastrnak, like he's another one. Like they've done so well to limit him so far, but he can just turn it on one night and throw pot 3 of them without even working hard. So that's it. It's the guys that you'd expect need to show up for both sides if they want to prevail.
Best way for the Caps to open up game 3 would be like a nice power play goal, Backstrom to Ovechkin in his favorite spot, and to get Rask like rattled early. I think that's the way that they really break through and start getting their groove.
Well, they
Yeah.
peppered Anderson. I mean, I can't remember exactly how many shots on goal they had, but he really did get, tested, throughout the entire experience. And I didn't hate his performance. It wasn't, top tier. He wasn't shutting them out. He wasn't like a Dominic Hasek from years ago or someone like that. But
he did everything. He did everything he could have. He didn't lose it. He didn't lose it for him, certainly. And if anything, I mean, I think Rask has been a little shaky. He had one kind of trickle on yesterday. It was bad. He had screened about 12 times, but he's had some leaky goals so far. Even the overtime winner from Oshida and then the Dow tip in overtime was kind of snuck through his equipment. So I think that's right. I think if they can come out, and we saw it in game one, like in the first shift, Ovi came out and just absolutely blasted Krejci.
Yeah, it was awesome.
When he comes with that kind of energy from the first shift, like that's what you need. So I think there's a good chance you see that tomorrow. Now matchups are going to change because we're changing venues. So
right.
Bruins are going to get less change. So that I'm interested to see how that goes. You saw a lot of really good stuff out of the Caps.
About that. I think that's a bigger factor because I already think there's been so many. They're so close in every phase of the game, but we're not playing with our best goaltenders. We're not. We've got our centers are hurt. Depth wise. Now we're not getting that. The second change. I mean, we're there's all those little factors start adding up real quick, and it's already the margin for error is so small that I do worry about this. So my level of concern is higher than what it should be. I know that we always say, the series doesn't really start until the visiting team gets a win at home, against the home team loses and the home team lost, so, are you guys nervous?
Yeah, for sure. Just because I've been down this road, right. And I don't think we know the condition of Lars Eller yet. He's a guy that's just plays in essentially every position. It just does, just talk about doing work and just doing your job, to borrow another team's phrase. So I think that's definitely a concern. What the situation is with Kuznetsov, what we're doing with goalkeeping. I think there's certainly some concerns. It could go south quick, but they've faced some adversity. They were down, down on the road, going down to Tampa 3-1 or 3-2.
Yeah.
And had to win 2 games and shut them out both times. Right now, that's great. Granted, that was St. Brendan and Hope Bay, but they're definitely capable. They've got everything they need to do. It's just about getting some bounces and doing the work.
I would just say that, going back to Boston for game 3, I think that the fans, even though it hasn't been full houses, they played a factor, in all the series around the NHL playoffs. And so I think that'll be an interesting point to watch as the series shifts back to Boston too. And I think it's, especially because the Caps lost game 2, it's going to be incredibly important that not only do they start well, but even if they can't pull out game 3, which I think is critically important, that they can't go out and come flat and, lose 4-1 or something like that. It needs to be another close competitive game. Hopefully they can come out and take the win, but they can't come out flat because I think that's really going to deflate them if they come out with a lazy 3-1, 4-1 type loss. So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What I was going to bring up is the game 3 factor. Usually, in a 1-1 series, game 3 is always a pivotal game. But the fact that they lost at home game 2 and they're underdogs in game 3 now, do you feel the series is so tight with those first 2 games that game 3 isn't going to be as much as pivotal? Or do you think that the winner of game 3 is going to have so much momentum that they're going to be able to just carry on and win the series?
I think it's more important for the Caps, especially coming off of that loss in game 2 and shifting back to Boston, and then having to play another game in Boston after that. I mean, I think that, like I said, they cannot come out flat in game 3. It's best case scenario, they get a win, of course, but I mean, they absolutely need to be ready to play and can't come out flat and play hard in game 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think game 3 is still crucial. I think if they, don't come through in game 3, obviously game 4 is, it's stupid to say this, but that's essentially a must win at that point because it's going to be hard to take 3 or 4 from this team. So I think if they win game 3 and drop game 4 in another, reasonably well contested matchup and come back, 2-2, I'm okay in a, 2 out of 3 maybe. I think that game 3 is pretty critical.
On a level of, 1 to 10, where is your freak out meter right now?
Where do I freak out at? Is it 10 or 1?
10.
5.5 to 6.
Now, how about after a game 3 loss? Where's that jump up?
Probably 7. Now,
Right
granted,
now,
go ahead, Joe.
right now, I would just say I would take a 1-1 split in Boston and then take my chances in the next 3.
Yeah.
That's what I would go for.
I would say my ranking, like my concern scale is always jaded because of the Jets have lost every possible opportunity I've seen in my life. So
Even when they won, they lost.
yeah, absolutely.
Fair enough. All right, final predictions. Do you think they win?
Game 3 or the series?
Game 3. They're winning game 3.
That's a binary question. I hate binary questions. I think in more opportunities, and more if you play the game 10 times, they win more than they lose.
What if they play one time?
There's a slightly greater chance that they win than lose.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Joe,
I'll
what
take
about
the Caps. I'll take the Caps in 6 with 2 more overtime games coming.
I need that for my blood pressure. Thanks.
Yeah, good for you. Thank you, Joe. For putting it out there and making a real prediction. Andy, how about you?
4-1 Bruins. I'm done with them.
I've had enough of this. When's college basketball coming back?
I mean, for what it's worth, I feel a lot better once it's over. So if that's what happens, then I'll feel better a lot sooner. So
Yeah, fair enough. I don't think they're going to win this next game, and I do think there's going to be a potential for like a 3-1 loss or something like that. But I think that they'll pull it together, get a little bit healthier for game 4, and I think that they'll have a chance to tie it up there. It'll be 2 games apiece. Then it'll be a whole new series again. That's kind of my prediction for right now. We're just waiting to see what happens. The other thing that happened, it's still kind of relatively new, and ironically, it's been going on for a while. But then I sent it to you guys. I wanted to talk to you guys about these NIL laws, and for those of you who don't understand what that is, it's the name, image, and likeness laws that are taking place. The NCAA is currently in a lawsuit where they are trying to, they want to be the ones who create the rules defining the difference between professional athletes and amateur athletes. And amateur athletes being the ones that are in college. The college players are getting upset by this because of the business of the NCAA is making so much money. We know that it's a billion-dollar industry, especially in things like, your non-Olympic sports that are like football and basketball that are making so much money. And now these players, who, they're putting on posters and they're putting in video games and they're using their likeness to essentially, make a whole bunch of money for the university. These players now want, some of that. States are starting to create their own laws saying that this should be handled from a state to state basis, including, Hogan here in Maryland, who just came out with the Jordan McNair law. Now, the only difference between his NIL law and some of the others is he had more safety regulations to protect something happening again with Jordan McNair that happened just a couple of years ago. There's so many layers to this, state versus federal safety concerns, the economic concerns, the amateur versus professional, laws that I don't think we're going to be able to figure it all out tonight. But I guess I want initially just for this, part of the discussion, I just want kind of like your general thoughts and what are what's the first thing that comes to mind for you guys?
Well, I'll go first and just give a very general thought. My very general thought is that anything that the NCAA has wanted entire control over in my entire lifetime seems to have been just totally screwed up. Nobody likes it, and everybody's blaming the NCAA at the end of it. So I'm not sure if they're the right, most unbiased organization to be calling the shots on this, but I will just say that that's my going in bias, is that everything that they've been involved in, I just have not been a fan of. And so I'll just start with that.
Well, can I follow up with that real quick? And I know that we joke about this. In this room, you're the only one who was a Division I athlete. And I know, you played at Wisconsin. You played at Wisconsin, and all that kind of good stuff. So your experience is going to be a little bit different. Is there anything but you also were in those same athletic rooms and you were part of conversations, I'm sure, while you were there. So you have, realistically, you do have more experience kind of dealing with the NCAA. So do you think some of that's playing to you? Or is there something in particular that you can remember going, yeah, this didn't feel right? or can you give us kind of any insight?
Well, I was a soccer player, obviously, so these things weren't, the money thing wasn't quite as big of a deal, obviously, for Division I soccer as it is for the footballs and basketballs out there and everything like that. But I will say that even if the athletes aren't getting paid for names and images and likeness and stuff like that, the money is still going to feed back into these programs somehow. And I know that when kids would come and tour the football facilities, the basketball facilities and stuff like that, they're looking at that stuff, and so however much money filters into these schools, I think that will have an effect on what recruits end up going there. And so that's how I can see it affected, like even at the sports that aren't at the, football, men's football and basketball level, is that it's going to eventually flow back into the school in the facilities and, however those schools are getting advertised, and that's going to eventually attract more high level recruits to that school.
Now, I have kind of two general thoughts on this one. The first is, when you think about, say, 30 years ago or 35 years ago, giving up your likeness rights didn't really mean that much. It wasn't any kind of crazy video game money, or there wasn't any kind of crazy advertising money. So now it's a different level of what you're giving up. I mean, and plus the education has gone skyrocketed as far as cost. So you can kind of do both sides where, yeah, you're getting a free education now, as you did 30 years ago, but that education cost the average person a lot more than it did back then. So that was kind of my first initial thought. And my second thought was these kids, I mean, you can kind of think of it contractually. If you're going to a university and you're expected to be, getting a free education, you kind of sign a contract saying, I give up my likeness rights. So I think it's hard to really take that away. But then again, you have, I'm all over the place here.
No, you're good. I mean, like there's a lot to cover in all this. I mean, that's kind of what we were saying. And so I think that's why people are having a hard time kind of, grasping it, because there are layers to it.
I think the second part I was trying to remember was the NCAA should either decide whether or not to pay them or decide whether or not they're professional. I don't think they should be able to do both. I think that just is that part, it kind of colludes the whole idea of, sure, we'll pay them, but we get to decide whether or not they're considered professional anymore. So it's just hard to really do that.
I think the argument too for states being the ones that are in charge of it is that the states that don't have as big of programs right now might be, attracted to use that as a tool to pull, athletes that they may not have been able to reach before into their programs. And so I think that's something to be considerate of also.
Yeah, they could offer something that no other school could offer. That's a money, and at least having the ability. Andy, kind of going back to what you were saying, I didn't realize one of the things that's involved in this is their social media presence, and their ability to make money off of like having a YouTube channel.
They can't get paid for posts on Instagram or whatever either. It's just crazy.
Yeah, that's something we never had to deal with.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a discussion even in that, right? In like pay for play versus just the strict name, name, image, likeness, right? Like if I'm going out and doing endorsements on my time and I'm doing, pay for Instagram or whatever it is, and I'm still, meeting my obligation in terms of like the team and the university, that's just kind of like, that's my time. Like, who are you to tell me what I should or shouldn't get for that service or for that? So I could see a place where kind of, both things are true, right? Where like, you're not necessarily drawing a salary to be an NCAA amateur player, but you can still, step outside. And if you're on, this level of talent or in this market where, you do have these lucrative opportunities for merchandising, for branding, for whatever else it is, then, more power to you. It's probably, it's hyper complicated to try to suss out things, down those kinds of lines. Because
so that
when does the school get involved in that kind of stuff also as a, partnership or whatever else it is. So that's not simple either.
What kind of rules would you want in place? Like if you were saying, okay, we're going to give you these, opportunities to start making money off of your name and likeness, there's got to be at least some general rules, because if every state seems to be doing it, I do worry that some states are going to be more lenient than others. I do worry about schools like Alabama, or Texas, that already has just, millions and millions of dollars, in California, expensive states like California, or even, I can't think of a team, Syracuse, someone who plays in New York, they could possibly get, funding that way. I do worry about that in creating almost like a competitive edge that nobody else would be able to compete with. It's almost like a salary cap, situation. So I guess I'm asking you guys, like, what kind of rules do you want in place? I know there's already some that appear to be kind of general, where like you can't get a Nike contract if the school has a Reebok contract, and you can't promote their products. You can't conflict. The schools, I guess, contracts will always supersede whatever you do individually. I know some schools saying you can't have any tobacco products. You can't be sponsored by a vape organization. You can't be sponsored by a strip club. I think Georgia is one of the states that said they don't want to give you the money now, but they will put it into a trust fund for you. So by the time you leave the school, you will be able to do whatever you want with it. I think up to 75% you can even distribute to other people. So what kind of rules for you guys would you want to initially see? Joe?
I would just like overall, to be in the interest of fairness, to have some sort of cap on per sport, how many athletes for a specific sport could be benefiting from name and images and likeness, because I think that might actually help fairness across the board. Because let's just say the number is 5 or something like that for football. Alabama, regardless of what their state's rules are, that might then draw some 5-star athletes to other schools because the 5 spots at Alabama are already taken up, or whatever the number is, right?
Yeah.
And so that might drive them away where normally they would all go to Alabama. So I would like to see a cap, or whatever the number is.
Do you think people will still take advantage of that? Because there have been rules in place before and they still find ways around them.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to find a way around the rule no matter what it is. But, in principle.
There's going to be some AAU coach, some snake that's going to try and figure out some way of doing whatever. But I think also one thing you have to try and do is, whether it's per sport or based on the sport, it's got to be same for everybody. So it can't be like 5 football players from a team getting different amounts of money based on this thing. It's got to be straight across, like a stipend you would get for doing a job somewhere else, whether it's $1,000 a season or $500 a season.
Is that fair? Like if I'm the quarterback, if I'm Trevor Lawrence and I come back to school and, I'm saying I get paid this and I'm on the cover of the new Madden that's coming out in a couple of years.
I think there's a sense of let the market decide that, right? Like, to steal kind of a little bit more from Andy than Joe, but, set figures for like you play on the football team, X% of snaps or whatever, you're a starter, probably X% of snaps. You get paid this stipend, whether it's, $1,000, who cares how we call it that. But that should be standard across.
But you want like a formulaic,
yeah. But then, any of the extracurriculars, sort of like the Trevor Lawrence example, if you're going to go out with Nike or you're going to go out to your local like Sizzlers or whatever, and they want to do some special promo with you and they want to throw you a little, some free steaks or whatever, right? Like that's, that, because the third string kicker is not Trevor Lawrence. So he doesn't necessarily need his free steaks, right? I think you're going to kind of let, some of those players and that like the market factors decide that who's going to get some of the extra stuff.
No, I know we're not talking steak here, but like if now Trevor gets that, let's say money, and then he starts passing it out to his, is it his money to do whatever he wants? Should he have a trust fund? Should he have to wait?
I think that's a pretty good idea. And I think it's going to be hard to find reasons to not do that. But at the same time, like if for whatever reason I was popular, if I did some, partnership with a brand for tweeting or something to my 68 followers or whatever it is.
Like did a podcast on a Maryland sports blog.
Yeah. Like, if I get that and like, I don't know that I should necessarily like it,
you get paid more than me.
Yeah. I don't know. I
think whatever it is, it shouldn't be connected to playing time, because then you can get the whole level of, if he plays 75% of the snaps, he gets X amount of dollars. Well, then that backup might just.
We're going to overtime, boys. I'm getting minutes.
I'll just say that at the end of this is just so complicated because of all the different sports, all the different like money that goes into sports. But you talk about men's versus women's, all that stuff. That if we're having this much trouble having a 20-minute discussion about it, just imagine how complicated the rules would be and how complicated it would be to enforce. It's just like, it's a nightmare.
And like we have varying views on politics, but that's playing a factor into this too. Because every state's going to have their own political view on it. It's going to depend on who's, in office. As of right now, I think there's 13 states that have approved it. Most of them appear to be more, Republican states. Hogan sent it, but, he's a Republican in a Democratic, state. But that almost brings like a whole different level of complication to it that doesn't need to be. But I do hope they get it figured out. Gentlemen, we actually have less than a minute. That kind of flew by. But before
I just want to throw in there whatever gets me my NCAA football back, like we talked about pregame or pre-show.
I don't care. Just give me my NCAA football. I'm completely with you. But before we get cut off, gentlemen, I want to raise a glass to you. This is always my favorite time. Once again, I hope you guys all have a fantastic week, and we'll figure it out in 30 minutes next week.
For sure.
Let's go, Caps. CAPS, Caps.
Cheers, boys.
All right. Cheers, guys.